Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in force, while thousands were gathered for early morning prayers during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. They say they went in to disperse Palestinians who were throwing stones and firecrackers toward the nearby Western Wall, a Jewish prayer area. Some Palestinians barricaded themselves inside the mosque as they fought back.
They brutally emptied the compounds. They were attacking the employees, normal people, the elderly, younger people. Many were injured. They were firing rubber bullets. They were beating everyone, even the paramedics.
The clashes followed 3 tense weeks of violence. Heightening these tensions, the Jewish holiday of Passover overlaps with Ramadan this year. They also happened at the most sensitive location in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Al-Aqsa compound sits on a site sacred in both Islam and Judaism, and confrontations there risk sparking a slide back into a broader resurgence of violence.
The occupation knows that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is a red line that must not be crossed. For this mosque, we sacrifice our hearts and blood, and we condemn it on behalf of our people and all those present at the mosque.
A spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister said that police had detained hundreds of Palestinians. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry said it holds Israel fully and directly responsible for this crime and its consequences.
All right, that is it from me from now, but don't go away. Georgia Calvin-Smith will be here with your Friday edition of Eye on Africa right after the break.
Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith.
All the latest in politics, economics and the arts in Africa on France 24. Our journalists are in every region, every country, to report on the emergence of a continent of unparalleled riches. Bringing you Africa's stories on France 24.
Thanks for joining us. See you again. Take care.
Liberté, égalité, actualité. Some of the world's most influential people talk to France 24.
Government cannot do much promotion of human value.
Politicians.
E acho que sem política, não há democracia.
Scientists, athletes and artists. Get all the insight.
The government is still spying.
And the voices that matter on France 24.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
War has once more reared its head in Europe, recalling the darkest hours of our history.
Kiev is still about 30 kilometers away.
France 24 is providing constant coverage of events in Ukraine. Our teams on the ground and in the studio will keep you informed of all the latest developments. Stay informed, stay aware.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the search for those missing from South Africa's deadly floods continues. The death toll rises to nearly 400 and a climate justice coalition files a criminal complaint against the government. Also, Senegalese citizens are speaking up about their frustrations with the health system following the death of a woman who was 9 months pregnant but whose calls for help were ignored by hospital staff. And as South Sudan unsteadily tries to implement the terms of a peace deal that was supposed to draw a line under 5 years of brutal civil war, aid agencies warn that a record number of people in the country are going hungry. But first, the death toll from South Africa's unprecedented floods has risen to nearly 400. Police, army and volunteers have been widening the search, looking for the dozens of people still missing after the storm that devastated Durban over the weekend. The Climate Justice Coalition has filed a criminal complaint of culpable homicide against the government. Nadine Theron tells us more.
Flooding is South Africa's worst ever natural disaster, but the country has been suffering from the worsening effects of climate change for at least a decade. KwaZulu-Natal saw 80 people killed in the 2019 flooding, and the Western and Eastern Cape provinces have just emerged from the worst droughts ever recorded. Climate scientists say the government should have been prepared for the latest climate disaster. The Climate Justice Charter want the government to be charged with culpable homicide, blaming this disaster on maladministration and criminal negligence. On Thursday, the movement reported the president and the cabinet to a local police station for failing to build climate-resilient infrastructure and not prioritizing the climate emergency. Its members say they've been trying to talk to and warn the president since 2018, and now they want a meeting with the national head of prosecutions. President Cyril Ramaphosa last year secured at least $8.5 billion to mitigate South Africa's carbon emissions, and he's been talking a lot about the just transition towards clean energy. But the movement says very little has actually been done. Although a transition away from coal energy can't happen overnight, experts say that there are other preventative measures the government could have taken ahead of the recent disastrous flooding. After the 2019 flooding, they could have built catchment areas on hills, they could have built stormwater drains in residential areas, and they could have educated people not to build their homes in low-lying areas. All measures that could have saved lives.
Nadine Thera there for us. Now, in Burundi, residents living on steep hills surrounding Bujumbura are increasingly affected by landslides and soil erosion. There, several homes as well as hectares of crops have been destroyed over the last few months. Laurent Berstecker tells us more.
Lush green hills overlook Lake Tanganyika to the east of Bujumbura. But this pastoral landscape is more dangerous than it looks for the hundreds of families living on these slopes.
Kwatagurika kw'iyi si kwatanguye muri iri ci riheze twabibona hatangura hasama hamwe none murabona ko ubu byayegeretse gose n'amazu.
In recent months, dozens of people have been left homeless after their houses were swept away by landslides or engulfed in crevices.
Ni Sukoline Kiremba mutumba Kiremba iyo miryango ni miryango 16 ifise iki kibazo.
The landslides are also affecting agriculture. In the Kabezi commune, several hectares of crops have been destroyed in less than 2 weeks.
Mu bisanzwe rero uko byagiye murabona yuko imyembe yagiye ihagaze.
The phenomenon is partly a result of the area's topography, with its steep slopes leaving it particularly vulnerable to landslides. But it's also been exacerbated by erosion and climate change. According to the World Bank, Burundi loses almost 38 million tons of soil each year because of land degradation.
The world's youngest country's recovery from 5 years of civil war has been unsteady. Around 400,000 people were killed in South Sudan in battling between fighters loyal to either President Salva Kiir or Vice President Riek Machar. Despite the 2018 peace deal, the threat of full-blown conflict remains as violence continues. The last few days have seen tens of thousands of people fleeing fresh clashes in Unity State. The instability has deepened a humanitarian emergency. This week, the UN's warned that the country is facing its worst ever food crisis, with around 8 million South Sudanese, or 2/3 of the population, facing hunger. Matthew Hollingworth, the World Food Programme's country director, tells us more.
Right now, South Sudan's facing these unprecedented levels of need. 8.9 million people need some form of humanitarian assistance in the country. Our food security assessments tell us that more than 7.7 million people are going to be facing very high levels of acute food insecurity later on this year, 62% of the population. That's happening because of conflict, as you said. That's happening because of massive climate change issues related to what is now a 4-year flood, again unprecedented in the country. Rising costs of food, rising costs of delivery because of COVID-19 earlier, but now also related to the fighting, the war in Ukraine. So these levels of need are, unseen before in South Sudan. But of course, as you said, it's at a time when we are getting into the last leg of the transitional period of the political settlement. So it couldn't come at a worse time.
Now, the peace deal was signed in 2018. Have you seen access to those in need improve at all since then?
I mean, clearly, as the nationwide civil war came to a hiatus, we have seen parts of the country really improve. Clearly, when there is stability, when there is peace, then we start to see people getting back on their feet, livelihoods expanding, improving the economy of different areas. So there's no question where we've seen stability, things have improved. But obviously, as you mentioned, the example just this last week of the fighting in Unity State in Lear County, now more than 25,000 people have been displaced. The World Food Programme itself has had to relocate more than 20 staff who were threatened because of the violence. We've lost warehouses, we've lost food that's been looted or burned, but most importantly, that's 25,000 people who've lost their homes, their livelihoods, all of the food that they'd grown in the previous harvest lost, their livestock lost. We're going to have to help them with everything now in terms of the humanitarian community, and it's coming at a time when all of us, the World Food Programme included, are strapped for resources to meet the enormous needs in this country.
So the needs greater than it's ever been, but the resources are less than they have been in previous years. Why has so much essential funding fallen off, and what's needed to stave off the worst?
I mean, clearly, there are many, many, many other crises in the world. In Yemen, in Ethiopia next door, in the Horn of Africa, in the Eastern Horn, with the drought this year. Obviously, Ukraine, which again is having other impacts, rising fuel prices, rising food prices globally, all impacting donors' ability to meet all of these needs at the levels they should do. We have had, enormous support from donors over the years. But clearly, there's also been a malaise, a bit of fatigue at the way the political process has moved. And so we've seen some drawdown as others have been able to at least maintain. But the needs are vast. I mean, the World Food Programme itself, we are $600 million short for the next 6 months in South Sudan to support upwards of 6 million people. And if we can't help those people, it's the impact. The impact is going to mean that, first of all, we will lose lives. Second of all, we will need to reduce the support we provide so that we can expand the number of people we provide it to, given the needs. That also means that the really critical work on development, resilience building, livelihoods building, the stuff that's going to change the lives of South Sudan, make this a more prosperous and peaceful country, that we're going to have to also reduce, because we're going to have to focus on life-saving alone.
Matthew Hollingworth there from the World Food Programme. Well, in Senegal, a hospital director has resigned and duty staff have been suspended after the death earlier this month of a woman who was 9 months pregnant. Staff were sanctioned after her calls for a caesarean section were ignored. The case has sparked an outcry and reflects wider frustrations about the Senegalese health system by the population. Our correspondents report.
The mood in Sokhna Astu's home is one of sadness and anger. Just days ago, this young woman lost her life in the public hospital of Louga, where her calls for a caesarean fell on deaf ears. Her aunt was witness to the scene and is still in shock.
She spent hours calling for help. She said that she was exhausted. She was suffocating and having vertigo. No one came to her rescue. She suffered and died in unacceptable conditions.
Sokhna's death has scandalized a nation. A march in her name was organized on Friday in the town where she died. Protesters were angry about the endemic lack of support for patients in Senegalese hospitals.
I'll give you a concrete example from not even 1 month ago. My young son fell ill overnight. He had an asthma attack. I took him to the emergency ward on Saturday morning. The nurse asked me why I brought my child to the hospital and told me we had to wait until Monday.
We're asking for 2 things: better reception, treatment, care and consideration of the human lives of the population. We're also asking for medical facilities to be better equipped.
The health minister told the press on Thursday that the young woman's death could have been avoided.
We are well aware that there is still work to do to humanize our health infrastructure. The treatment of patients remains at the heart of our concerns. We say that the client is king. Well, in hospitals, the patient is king. Particular efforts will be put on reinforcing training of health staff, especially when it comes to welcoming patients.
Over the course of 4 days, 80,000 people have signed an online petition calling for an end to the medical negligence faced by women in Senegalese hospitals.
Well, an undocumented Algerian migrant in Belgium is battling to claim a €250,000 jackpot he won with a scratch card. A lawyer is helping him, as he can only be paid if he can prove his identity, which is difficult without papers. The winning scratch card is currently being held by a court in Bruges after 3 friends tried to claim it unsuccessfully on the 28-year-old's behalf. Now, the winning ticket was bought a few weeks ago in Zeebrugge and, if claimed, offers its owner the shot at a new life. Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
They observe. They contact us. They report, film, photograph. They are the voice of the voiceless. Your eyes in the far-flung reaches of the world. The Observers, a network of 5,000 committed citizens working with France 24.
One of our observers in Côte d'Ivoire, Gaspard.
Amateur footage and testimonials checked by our journalists and broadcast weekly. On The Observers, on France 24 and observers.france24.com. Your needs are changing, and so is France24.com. With articles, reports, the latest international news, all our programs available on replay, together with live broadcasting 24/7. Intuitive, fast, and available in 4 languages. France24.com. Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Welcome back. You're watching live from Paris. Here are the headlines this hour. Kyiv is hit by retaliatory strikes. Russia bombs the factory that made the missiles that sunk their flagship, the Moskva. France marks 3 years since the terrible fire at Notre Dame. President Emmanuel Macron visits the building ahead of the 2024 target for the completion of renovation works. And calm returns to Jerusalem after Israeli police launch an assault on worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. More than 150 Palestinians were injured in the operation. Ukrainian authorities are fearing more retaliatory strikes 24 hours after they claimed their missiles sank the Russian flagship in the Black Sea. The Pentagon now also agreeing with that version of events and calling the sinking of the Moskva, quote, a big blow for Moscow. This Friday, Russian strikes hit a military factory near Kyiv. That location is where the missiles used to sink the Moskva were built. Emerald Maxwell has the latest.
Day was just breaking when the air raid sirens started wailing. The strikes hit this site in the southern suburbs of the capital. totally destroying this weapons factory. Moscow has claimed responsibility.
Last night, long-range, sea-based caliber missiles hit a military facility on the outskirts of Kyiv. The number and scale of missile strikes on targets in Kyiv will be ramped up in response to any terrorist attack or sabotage by the Kyiv nationalist regime on Russian territory.
A reference to the alleged shelling of 2 Russian villages on the Ukrainian border, an attack Kyiv hasn't confirmed carrying out. President Zelensky did, though, claim responsibility for the sinking of this Russian cruiser, the Moskva. He said Russia's naval flagship sank in the Black Sea after being hit by a Ukrainian missile.
Ті, хто показав, що російські кораблі можуть піти, хіба що на дно.
Moscow hasn't acknowledged an attack and blamed the ship's sinking on damage from ammunition detonating as a result of a fire. Either way, its loss would appear to be a setback for Russia and, at the very least, a blow to military morale. In March, the Ukrainian Navy destroyed another key Russian vessel, the Orsk, a landing support ship at a port 80 kilometers from Mariupol.
As we've said, the Moskva is now at the bottom of the Black Sea. It gained notoriety in the early days of the Russian war when crew on that ship ordered Ukrainian soldiers on Snake Island to surrender. The soldiers replied using colorful language. Ukraine's post office has now begun printing a stamp showing the event, and it's become a symbol of national resistance. Sinead McCausland has more.
It's one for the philatelists, or post stamp collectors. Ukraine's National Postal Service has released 1 million special edition stamps depicting a Ukrainian fighter holding up their middle finger towards the now sunken Russian warship, Moskva. Ukrainians queued up to get a memento of the moment.
З цих часів, коли нарешті ми закінчимо цей весь, як це сказати, бардак з Росією і якби зафіксувати цю подію, потім показати дітям, онукам, розказати, як це все було і показати на марці цю саме фразу.
Dubbed the First Day stamp, it interprets the February 24th incident on Snake Island, when this Ukrainian border guard, Roman Gribov, shouted at Russian forces on an encroaching Moscow ship using colorful language. His gesture has become a symbol of national resistance.
I think it shows the resilience of people. It shows how Ukraine will fight, and as we all know, win. I'm sure there will be next great stamps that will celebrate the victory of Ukraine.
Kyiv awarded Gribov a medal for his services in March after he was freed from Russian captivity. As for the Moskva, Kyiv says a Ukrainian missile attack sank the Russian warship, a claim backed up by Washington. But Moscow insists it was because of a fire on board.
Here in France, this Friday marks 3 years since the fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral. Catholic worshippers convened for prayer and song outside the building. President Emmanuel Macron also visited the cathedral, inspecting the renovation work. He has pledged that Notre Dame would reopen to worshippers by 2024 when the French capital hosts the Olympics. Our team at Revisited has made it their mission to bring you annual updates on how the renovation is going. Here's a part of this year's episode.
During the fire, hundreds of tons of lead melted and then settled as toxic dust all over the building, adding to the dust that had been building up since the 19th century.
We must remove this pollution, in particular the lead oxides that have settled and mixed with the initial dust, so that we can work in healthy conditions that comply with safety standards to protect the workers who will be working on the site.
Pascal Prunet is checking that the scaffolding has been installed without risk for the decontamination teams.
There are still holes in the frame here. There's more than 20 centimeters. It's not normal. We'll have to manage it as well as possible. It's been delicate to erect this scaffolding as close as possible to the building, because there are obstacles and they have to be managed and you can't move them.
These giant scaffolds have been adapted to fit the complex shapes of the cathedral. It has to include, for example, all the artwork on the outside.
This is a very famous group of statues in the cathedral, known as the Vow of Louis XIII. It is installed in the axis of the choir. And so you can see it's already been restored a long time ago. These fingers have been repaired or replaced. But then you can see the dirt that had settled inside the stone.
The result of the dust removal work is striking. You can now see the cathedral's vaults just as its 19th century visitors saw them, immaculately white. With 2 years to go on the project, the biggest surprise has not come from up here. An exceptional discovery has been made underground.
There was a very strong fire here. This is where the spire fell. There was a pile of rubble that we gradually removed, and these elements were discovered underneath.
The elements he's referring to are fragments of the former rood screen of Notre Dame, of which only a few pieces had been found, now housed in the Louvre Museum. A human-shaped lead sarcophagus was also dug out, which probably dates from the 14th century.
We were able to pass an endoscopic camera inside, which allowed us to identify tissue remains, but also organic matter such as hair and also plant remains, particularly at the head level with small leaves. At first glance, it looked like boxwood, but that is yet to be confirmed. And this is a practice reserved for the social elite. We're not talking about embalming, but about maximum preservation of the body. The fact that these plant remains are still there proves that the contents have been very well preserved.
But the building work must take precedence over this extraordinary discovery. The archaeologists obtained an extension, but will finally have to leave Notre Dame. The spot they've been excavating is needed for the 100-meter scaffolding required to rebuild the spire.
And you can watch the full show this Sunday at 7:10 p.m. GMT, 9:10 p.m. Paris time, or online whenever you want at France24.com. Peace and quiet have returned to Jerusalem tonight after an explosion of violence earlier in the day. Thousands of Palestinians were gathered at the Al-Aqsa Mosque for Friday prayers when Israeli police armed with rubber bullets, stun grenades, and batons attacked the worshippers. Israeli authorities say that was after a group of young men threw rocks at part of the mosque compound. More than 150 Palestinians were injured in the assault. Emerald Maxwell has the details.
Armed with rubber bullets, stun grenades and batons, Israeli police entered Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in force, while thousands were gathered for early morning prayers during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. They say they went in to disperse Palestinians who were throwing stones and firecrackers toward the nearby Western Wall, a Jewish prayer area. Some Palestinians barricaded themselves inside the mosque as they fought back.
They brutally emptied the compounds. They were attacking the employees, normal people, the elderly, younger people. Many were injured. They were firing rubber bullets. They were beating everyone, even the paramedics.
The clashes followed 3 tense weeks of violence. Heightening these tensions, the Jewish holiday of Passover overlaps with Ramadan this year. They also happened at the most sensitive location in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Al-Aqsa compound sits on a site sacred in both Islam and Judaism. And confrontations there risk sparking a slide back into a broader resurgence of violence.
The occupation knows that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is a red line that must not be crossed. For this mosque, we sacrifice our hearts and blood, and we condemn it on behalf of our people and all those present at the mosque.
A spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister said that police had detained hundreds of Palestinians. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry said it holds Israel fully and directly responsible for this crime and its consequences.
Police, army, and volunteer rescuers in South Africa continued combing through debris this Friday, 5 days after a major storm hit the coastal city of Durban. The ensuing flooding left a trail of destruction and 395 people dead. James Fazina has the latest.
It's the result of the deadliest storm to hit South Africa's eastern city of Durban in living memory. Amid the city's grief, emergency workers and volunteers are trying to bring a sense of normality back.
seeing the place like this. I mean, we always like coming to the beach, you know. So it's just terrible to see. My kids surf here like every weekend, and so it's heartbreaking to see the beach like this.
And top of their priorities is preventing the piles of plastic from ending up in the sea.
We've got such devastation with plastics and that in our oceans. We're basically killing our oceans, and if we don't look after the oceans, we won't have a beach to appreciate in future years to come.
A trail of destruction in residential neighbourhoods and in nearby villages as floods continue to wreak havoc 5 days on. These satellite images give us a sense of the extent of the damage. Entire areas wiped out by mudslides. NGO workers are handing out food to those affected in the town of Isipingo, and they're calling for more donations.
The whole community is affected very, very bad. It's a state of disaster.
Floods on this level haven't been seen for 60 years, and with more bad weather planned for Easter weekend, there are fears that further trouble could be on the way.
Coming up next, France 24's daily update on the presidential election. It's France 2022, The Choice.
Welcome to France 2022, The Choice, our daily show covering the presidential race. And we have 10 days to go before round 2. An old controversy over the Muslim veil pops up again, while some students are really upset about the results of round 1. Here's the recap of the day with Shirley Sitba.
A quiet stroll on the market? Not really. Opposition to Marine Le Pen has become more vocal. On the national scale, too. Political leaders have called to block her from becoming president.
Ça me confirme dans l'idée que je peux gagner cette élection présidentielle, car la brutalité qui est exprimée à mon égard est proportionnelle aux chances que j'ai de gagner cette élection.
Her opponents say it's Le Pen and her ideas who are brutal, like the plan to ban the Islamic veil.
Parce que le voile, c'est un uniforme que cherche à imposer au fur et à mesure du temps des gens qui ont une vision radicale de l'islam. C'est faux, c'est pas.
A bit earlier in the day, the hard-right candidate gave a better picture of what she meant.
J'interdirais les uniformes islamistes. Et vous savez, il y a des signes d'un certain nombre d'idéologies totalitaires par le passé qui ont fait beaucoup de mal à notre continent, me semble-t-il. Eh bien, ces signes distinctifs sont évidemment, et Dieu merci, interdits. Eh bien, il en sera de même pour les signes de l'idéologie islamiste.
Emmanuel Macron faced a young woman who accused him of zigzagging on the issue, which he denied.
Déjà, il y a 5 ans, existait dans le débat le fait d'interdire le voile, à l'université par exemple ou ailleurs. Je me suis toujours opposé à cela. Regardez les 5 ans qui viennent de s'écouler. Est-ce que j'ai changé quelques règles que ce soit sur le voile? Non. Non. Et là, nous sommes dans une situation où aujourd'hui, il y a face à moi un projet d'extrême droite qui consiste à proposer à ce que la France soit le premier pays au monde qui interdise le voile dans l'espace public.
Le Pen was pushed on the thorniest issues, like the death penalty. After saying it could be reinstated by referendum, she took a U-turn.
Vous pourriez faire un référendum sur la peine de mort? On peut pas, c'est anticonstitutionnel.
Let's fly away. That's what Prime Minister Jean Castex must have thought as he traveled to campaign for his boss on an island where he came third.
Je me bats beaucoup, j'insiste là-dessus parce que il y a une période de banalisation, d'oubli, tout se vaut, n'est-ce pas?
All is equal? For example, Le Pen and Macron? Yes, say some students occupying the Sorbonne. But they've been forced out. Their anger won't be evacuated easily.
Il s'agirait d'arrêter en fait de penser que la démocratie ça se fait seulement dans les urnes.
Vraiment, je m'étais promis de ne pas revoter Macron. Le choix est très difficile.
That is all from the campaign trail. Meet again on Monday, same time, same place.
We're now joined on the set by France 24's Angela Diffley, our campaign contributor. Hello, Angela. Both candidates have been talking, as we just saw in the recap, about the Muslim veil during their walkabouts. Let's take another listen at the incumbent, this time in the port city of Le Havre.
We have millions of fellow citizens who are Muslim. They must be able to live peacefully in our country. No country in the world has banned the veil in public spaces. No country. You want France to be the first? Come on, in the land of freedom.
So, Angela, why is the veil such a contentious issue in French politics?
Yeah, it's important to understand the place of religion in France. It's not the same as in many Anglophone countries. In 1905, a law was passed in France stipulating that religion and the state must be kept very separate. And that was nothing to do with Muslims. There were very, very few Muslims living in France at the time. And it was all about trying to make people coexist peacefully alongside each other, and particularly about pushing back the all-powerful Catholic Church at the time. Now, since then, of course, there have been very many more other religions in France, and they too are, of course, bound by this law, which has had some adjustments made to it since then.
And so what are the rules at the moment, currently?
At the moment, anybody can wear the Muslim veil or the Jewish skull cap, turban, any other kind of religious headgear or anything else in the streets, in the shops, going to a restaurant, anywhere else they can go about their life. You are not allowed to wear the Muslim veil or any other Jewish skull cap, any other religious headgear or any other religious symbols in a state-run school, and that applies equally to the teachers and to the pupils, and neither are you allowed to wear any religious symbols in any state institutions, so any public sector offices, for example, the post office. And the burqa or niqab, any face covering, full face covering veil, is completely banned in France. And that was banned on the grounds that it was inherently demeaning to women, even if they chose to wear it, and the French Constitutional Court backed that. Later, it was challenged in the European Court of Human Rights, and they found that the ban should be upheld, this time on the grounds that the burqa did not comply with France's idea of people living alongside each other in society.
Right. So what might change after this election?
Well, Marine Le Pen would like to ban the hijab, the Muslim veil, in public places. And it's not at all clear, Macron wouldn't change anything, he would keep everything as it is. It's not at all clear, though, whether Marine Le Pen would be able to ban the hijab in public places on constitutional grounds. She says, yes, she would, because, first of all, she would have a referendum on the matter, and that would give it considerable weight in any court challenge. And also because she wouldn't ban it, as we heard there in that clip, as a religious garment, but as the representation of an ideology. And so she says that those two factors would mean that she could get it through any constitutional challenges. And she's doing this because some voters, she maintains, are worried that France's traditions and cultures and liberties are being threatened. Emmanuel Macron says that she is willfully confusing political Islam, and he also says the police have better things to do than to fine people for wearing veils.
Right, so let's take a look at the latest polls for the second round of voting on April 24th.
Right, they're interesting. This is the latest poll from our partner, Ipsos Soprasteria. It shows that Emmanuel Macron is now at 56% versus 44% against Marine Le Pen. This was much tighter. This was 52-48 just after round one. This does not mean that the election is already over. Far from it, but it's a healthy lead now for Emmanuel Macron. It's 10 points less than he won in 2017, but still that puts him in a good position right now.
And both candidates are battling out on the issue of cost of living in this campaign. And we've just learned, actually, that the CEO of car maker Stellantis will reportedly earn a whopping 60 million euros this year. That's going to play a part.
That's obviously big news, especially during a presidential election. So both candidates were asked about it, and for once, they reacted in a very similar way. Let's take a listen to both of them.
It's shocking, excessive. We're talking about astronomical sums here. Without going as far as to regulate pay packages within a price range, we should cap them on a European level.
Bien sûr que c'est choquant.
Of course, it is shocking. I believe that one of the ways to mitigate these pay packages that are out of proportion with economic life could be precisely to bring in employees as shareholders. I'm not talking about profit sharing only. I think that in companies such as this one, we should discuss a concept that would be similar to a legal reserve of securities.
And far-left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon won about 22% of the vote in the first round. So obviously those votes are going to be the main sort of target for both candidates this time around.
Yes, they're openly courting those voters. Mélenchon urged them not to vote for Marine Le Pen in round 2, but do they vote for Macron? Do they abstain? Do they vote blank? Many of them are wondering, and they are torn. Our colleagues from France 3 went to the city of Creil, north of Paris, to take the temperature.
In the city of Creil, north of Paris, left-wing voters are grappling with how to cast their ballots in the second round. Far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon won 56% of the vote here in the first round, and many residents are still digesting his third-place finish.
You wanted him to be president?
The French should have wanted it.
Are you going to vote in the second round?
No, there's no point.
Even local police officers are undecided.
We're going to have another 5 years of struggle.
Between incumbent Emmanuel Macron and far-right Marine Le Pen, some are leaning toward Le Pen.
I'd like her to win because I think she'd do a good job.
The debate over the retirement age is central. Le Pen wants to keep it at 62. Macron wants to raise it to 64 or 65.
Do you think people should work for longer?
No. No, life is already too hard. There are certain trades that are really difficult. People would like to enjoy life before they die. Some people retire and barely have time to do that before they pass away.
Others feel differently.
I'm ready to work until 70 if that's what it takes to stop the far right from taking power. It doesn't bother me.
Some are wondering how Macron's retirement reforms would affect pensions and how they would take into account arduous working conditions.
I would prefer that my retirement not be pushed to 64 or 65, that's for sure. But I still don't know whether I'm going to actually vote.
Young voters also feel stuck.
Who voted for Jean-Luc Mélenchon?
These first-time voters have decided they won't vote in the second round, even if it means the far right winning the presidency.
I would feel responsible because I wouldn't have blocked it. But it would be against my values and principles to vote for Macron and his policies.
It remains unclear how many Mélenchon supporters will turn out to vote in the second round.
And in the lead up to the presidential vote, we're going to take the pulse of the country. Our journalists, Julie Dungoloff and Florence Villeminot, have been crisscrossing France, meeting voters to understand their daily lives, their concerns, and, as you'll see, their ideas for the future of the country.
Yeah, and this week they met up with Officer Abdoulaye Kanté, who's eager to change people's negative perceptions about the French police.
I've been a police officer since 1999. I started as an emergency responder. Later, I worked in Seine-Saint-Denis outside Paris. I worked on violent crimes like kidnappings and rape and also narcotics. One event that really marked me was the terrorist attacks in November 2015. My team was one of the first to reach the Stade de France, and we also participated in the raid in Saint-Denis. I was born in France, and when I was 2 years old, I went to live in Mali, where my parents are from. When I was 15, I came back to France. When you're from Africa and you join a force like the police, you have to go above and beyond the others around you. I've experienced racism. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't. But when you talk about racism in the police, I always say that the French police are not racist. Rather, there can be isolated racist behavior that has to be stamped out and denounced. The police have the power to enforce the law, but they have a role to educate people. I'm going to meet a group of young people who are either struggling at school or facing isolation from society.
Have any of you experienced difficult encounters with the police?
Yes, there is unacceptable behaviour out there that gets reported and sanctioned. Often these colleagues put people unnecessarily on edge. But today, you young people have the law on your side. These are legitimate questions. For too long, the institution has been seen as one that covers up racism. But it's not only that. If I were president, I'd create a great youth ministry to ensure that young people stop moping around. It would give them hope. I'd create a ministry for national diplomacy and consensus to promote dialogue and ensure that people talk to each other.
And that's it for this edition of France 2022, The Choice. Join us on Monday at 8:15 Paris time.
Faced with the Russian invasion, a spirit of resistance and unity has taken hold of Ukraine. Our reporters on the ground have been talking to civilians and soldiers, young conscripts, volunteer paramedics and doctors who operate or deliver babies underground as the bombs fall. Trapped by the war, the Ukrainian people tell stories of darkness and despair, but also of courage and hope. Watch reporters on France 24 and France24.com.
France marks 3 years since the terrible fire at Notre Dame. President Emmanuel Macron visits the building ahead of the 2024 target for the completion of renovation works. And on the campaign trail, Marine Le Pen receives an icy welcome in a village in the south of France as she tries to win over voters ahead of the runoff on April 24th. Ukrainian authorities are fearing more retaliatory strikes 24 hours after they claimed their missiles sank the Russian flagship in the Black Sea. The Pentagon now also agreeing with that version of events and calling the sinking of the Moskva a big blow for Moscow. This Friday, Russian strikes hit a military factory near Kyiv. That location is where the missiles used to sink the Moskva were built. France 24's Rob Parsons has more from the Ukrainian capital.
The Ukrainian authorities have been very tight-lipped about it, but it does seem to be the case that it was a weapons factory. Whether or not it was producing the Neptune missiles, not absolutely clear at the moment, though it does seem to be the case. It was struck by 3 to 5 missiles, according to different eyewitnesses, in the middle of the night, around 1:30 to 2 in the morning, and appears to have hit an administrative centre and a workshop. Not causing extensive damage, according to the reports we've been getting. But clearly this is a gesture of retaliation by the Russians. They haven't been admitting that it was Ukrainian missiles that hit the Moskva, but the nature of their retaliation does rather suggest that that is what happened.
Meanwhile, Russia is continuing its attempt to keep a tight lid on information during this war. Moscow has blocked the website of France 24's sister radio station RFI, as well as over a dozen of other media outlets. In a statement, the CEO of parent company France Média Monde said RFI was, quote, paying the price of its independent work and first-hand reporting. The focus of Russian military command has clearly shifted to the east of the country, near the Donbass region, which has been contested since 2014. The city of Kramatorsk was the theater of Russian bombardment just days ago, and a large explosion was heard there once again this Friday. A number of people are looking to flee the city, while others are ignoring repeated calls by the Ukrainian authorities to do so. Our team on the ground sent us this report.
Trains are no longer evacuating civilians from the region via